Are you in or are you out? And so she was like, I'm in. So we developed a business plan, figured out who we want to service, how we want to do it, had the relationship with Exos still, and said, hey, Exos, if I bring in veterans and first responders into your facility, and we hired mental health clinicians to do kind of an intensive clinic inside of there, would you be willing to help facilitate? And they agreed to it. And we ran 2 pilot programs, one being a week long and the other one being 2 weeks long, at least the in-person portion. And then those were successful. And we ended up settling on a 3-week in-person experience and then a 9-week telehealth off-ramp.
All right, guys, welcome back. Brand new episode of the podcast today. We have an amazing individual who's sitting across this digital table with me. Steven, man, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. Happy to be here.
So, Steven, I think it's really important to talk about your origin story and the amazing work that you're doing now to serve our community of veterans in such a multifaceted way. So, who are you and what is the work that you're doing, man?
Well, like I said, I'm Steve Nisbet. I'll just go back to where where I came from and then how I got to where I am today, and or at least somewhat, and then we can get into the story a little bit deeper. So born in Colorado, Aurora, Colorado, moved to Tucson, Arizona when I was around 5 years old or so. 2 brothers, a twin brother and an older brother. And as I was growing up, I really enjoyed soccer, played soccer all my childhood. And that was the plan. That was what I wanted to do. That's what my dream was to grow up and be a professional soccer player. And, I went to a public school, public high school and middle school and everything. Didn't play club soccer or anything like that, but, I had the will and the desire. But, as I started experiencing high school, I started realizing there's no scouts that are coming to my small public high school, and no one's coming out and looking out to see what I'm doing, and so the realization started coming when I was a junior and senior, and I started to figure out, okay, well, what am I going to do? I'm not getting a scholarship to some university or anything like that. No one's coming and looking at our soccer team. It's not like we weren't a super good team anyway. So I started having to figure out what am I going to do next in life. And my dad had spent his entire adult life in law enforcement. He did several years in the Air Force. And so that was in the back of my mind, maybe I'll become a police officer like my dad. But what I also enjoyed was space. I was a space nerd. I enjoyed doing, astronomy and whatnot. And so I was like, you know what, I'm going to go to Pima Community College in Tucson, go to school there. All my other buddies, they were all really smart, and they went to universities for engineering degrees and whatnot, and that wasn't something I was interested in, and nor did I get a scholarship to do any of that stuff. So, so I chose astronomy as essentially my major. Went to community college, showed up, and then I just looked around at the people around me, and it was a lot of folks that were considerably older than I was at the time. I was 18, and it was really boring. It just wasn't what I really wanted to do, and I was like, man, I still haven't figured it out. And so as I continued looking at the next steps, I was like, all right, well, I need just a complete shift in what my life is right now. And really all my buddies are going and working for Raytheon and IBM. That's what their plans are. And, I was like, okay, well, those are a lot of weapons manufacturing jobs. I'll just go into the Air Force and do something. And then that's my pathway to university. I'll use the 9/11 or the GI Bill and then go to college through there. So I looked at some recruiters and I tested the ASVAB test and did really well on that. And essentially was like, well, what's a job that you can do that you have to have a high ASVAB score? That's something I just wanted to challenge myself intellectually. And they're like, nuclear weapons apprentice. And I was like, boom, they're connecting some dots. I'll go and work this nuclear weapons job, and then I'll get out, go to university, catch up with my pals, and we'll all be together again, hanging out just like we used to. And I had selected that and signed a contract and everything. I walked out of the office, and there was an Army recruiter that happened to be smoking a cigarette right next door. And he's like, "Hey, son," and I was like, "I'm not interested." and I don't want to be in the army. That was one thing I don't want to be in the army. And he's like, you want to be in special forces? And I was like, dang, I never thought of that. And I was like something inside of me just kind of perked up. Like I never thought of myself being that. Like that sounds interesting, but I don't want to be in the army. So I was like, I'll hear what you have to say. So I went in, listened to him, give his pitch, and then I said, I might come back. Hang on a second. I went back over to the Air Force, and I was like, hey, I know I just signed a contract, but do you guys have any Air Force special operations jobs? And they're like, yeah, but you wouldn't make it. And I was like, oh, all right. How about let me navigate that, and I'll figure that out. But tell me what those jobs are. So pararescue and combat controls. Had no clue what either of them did. One did medicine. One was combat control that I like still couldn't fathom at that time. Of like, I don't understand how you control combat, but like if you're carrying a gun and shooting bad guys and you're considered a special operator, I'll do that. So I didn't want to do anything medicine, and so I trained really hard. I knew what the selection test was going to be, so it physically changed trained for the physical ability and stamina test, pass test, and when I showed up to take it, and I trained a certain way to do combat control. That's what I wanted to do, and they're like, "Which one are you going to take?" And so, well, what's the difference? Like one has a swim at the beginning, one has a one at the end. And I was like, does that matter? They're like, nope, doesn't really matter. It goes to the same spot anyway. I was like, okay, I'll do the swim at the beginning, and then just as I trained, and I did the whole test. And they're like, all right, finished. You're selected. You are going to go to Indoc to become a PJ. And I was like, I thought I was going to be a controller. And they're like, they're the same thing. Go to Indoc. It's the same place, and then you'll figure it out. And I was like, okay, um, I'll just do that. Like, and I believed him. And then I showed up to Indoc, and it was not the same thing, and it was not it. And I was now in the pipeline to become a PJ and do medicine. So, um, yeah, so that's how I entered into the special operations world, and then ultimately ended up deploying a lot and getting to where I was and starting the organization I'm at today. So, I don't know if you have any questions in between then. No.
Yeah, man. What was it about special forces that kind of like attracted you? You had that natural, I would say, light bulb that went off in your head, and you were like, "This is going to be for me." Was it the challenging? Was it the intellectual? Was the complexity of all of it coming together? What was it that kind of attracted you to that?
That's a really good question. I think it was the challenge in proving to myself that I could do something really that nobody else in my family had done and nobody else in my inner circle had done it was like, here's a risk that I'm willing to take. I'm willing to take this risk and give everything I have to go do something that was special. And I'd never really considered myself to be that. And now I was like, well, here's an opportunity that I can do that and not be a SEAL, because the SEALs even now they're books, movies, all the whole thing. Like they're so well known. And I didn't have a desire to go to the SEAL route, so this was very appealing to me.
I'm really interested about, when you talk to that Army recruiter, you go back into the Air Force office, say, "Hey, do you guys have special forces?" And he says, "Hey, you're not gonna make it. You're not cut out for this."
Yeah.
I saw a little bit of your, I would say, competitive nature kind of flare up and say, "I'm gonna prove you wrong here." Why do you think that was your natural intuition when it came to that? Was it the experience of competitive sports and you didn't get a shot? I'm just wondering, like, what was the basis and driver that kind of had you kind of puff up that way?
Yeah, I think it's looking at the individual who's telling you that. This person standing in front of me that told me I'm not going to make it hasn't tried himself. He didn't get there. So what does he know about what it takes to get there? And how does he know what I have? This dude has no clue who I am. So I think it was just taken into account, like, something I tell people, especially my kids is um, I don't put a lot of stock in people that I don't know or don't really respect. For me to care about what somebody has to say, I have to respect them. And at that time, like I didn't really respect the guy because I didn't know the guy. Like, and so for him to say something like that, it was more so. Well, you've never tried. You're not wearing a beret. You didn't go through Indoc. So how would you know? And it was the same thing throughout basic training. You had basic training instructors, TIs, telling me the same thing, and really, I mean, it's a trend throughout everywhere, even starting the nonprofit, is people who have never done it will tell you not to do it or tell you it's too hard, and they just don't know what hard is for me because it's a spectrum. It's a scale. Right?
That idea of someone telling you you're not going to make it, I've always had that chip on my shoulder very transparently. Often, when people indicate, hey, you're not going to be able to do this, it's not possible, don't go down that route, it's often an indicator that that is the exact route that we should be kind of marching towards. You know what I mean? To accomplish things that people couldn't even fathom.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. And I think I think this individual probably sees, the recruiter probably sees a lot of people that come through and have a desire and a want and a will to do it, but then it's a 90% attrition rate. And at that time, I was 120, 130 pounds, soaking wet. I was a very small, skinny guy that didn't really, couldn't grow a beard or anything, and it was just a young 18-year-old with a dream that he probably was like looking at, oh, you got to look like this to make it through there. And realistically, when you're going through indoc and you're going through selection, it's generally not the guy that looks like the movie stars. It's the person that is actually very unbecoming, that you're like, this guy that actually looks more like a computer nerd and is probably the most lethal person on the battlefield.
Never judge a book by its cover, is what I'm hearing you say.
Exactly right.
All right, so let's advance a little bit farther down the road here. So what happens next? So we talk about, we've been deployed a couple times. What are the experiences like? I know that we had an event that happened in Wyoming, and I'm hoping that we can kind of tie all of this and kind of talk about that experience as well, if you're okay with that.
Yeah, so the accident, that accident I think you're referencing is in Idaho. And we'll get to that. It's kind of what the catalyst that really took me to where I am now. But yeah, so I got to my first unit in 2008, and all my buddies were. I was in Okinawa, Japan, and all my buddies were deploying, and there was a fear of like, man, I'm gonna miss the war. I mean, I did all this training, I did all this, put myself through just some heinous things, and I'm gonna end up not being employed the way that I intended or that I trained to be. So I got there in 2008, and I didn't deploy until 2010. And really, when I was going through the pipeline and going like figuring out what being a PJ or a pararescueman even was, my mindset was still not so much into the combat sense, and more thinking of it like um, a civilian a civilian search and rescue is really what I was like, man, I really like. I'm not really into going out and getting into combat and shooting people and whatnot. Like at that time, it wasn't who I was, and so I had this plan to, okay, I just want to do rescue and do civil SAR, and then I went to the Special Tactics Squadron in Okinawa and deployed in 2010, augmenting the task force, the Joint Task Force out there, and day three being in Afghanistan, in eastern Afghanistan, we got a VBED hit the base, and then a complex attack on the base. And it was the first time somebody was looking through either a scope or an optic or iron sights shooting at me, and so the realization, like, somebody's at the end of, like, just a few hundred meters away over there, is looking at me and shooting at me. And so that was like a really odd realization to be like, somebody's actually trying to kill me. And so once that adrenaline rush hit, and you could see the rounds hitting around you, and those guys all ended up getting killed in some form or fashion. It was exciting, and I was like, interesting. Like, fortunately, no Americans were hurt, no coalition forces were hurt. And then throughout the rest of that deployment, it was a pretty busy one with different things that took place, and ended up re-enlisting out there. And I was like, oh, I actually want to do that again. I want to give it another shake and scratch the itch. And then ended up moving to Las Vegas to do the rescue squadron there. And I did a civil SAR, and it wasn't what I thought it was going to be. Did a couple of rescues out in Zion National Park, and then deployed a couple more times to Afghanistan, where we really got into some good firefights, and it was a lot of ups and downs. As far as adrenaline rush goes, I mean, you can see like that there's an age, a time period where the technological age was coming into play, where technology was just being infused into the war, into combat. And so the first deployment, it was all sat phones. If I wanted to call home, I was dialing up on a sat phone, and maybe it would go through, maybe it wouldn't. there'd be 2 weeks, 3 weeks at a time that I even be able to talk to my wife or my family back home. You'd have to go to like an internet cafe or like a phone booth and have like a phone card that you'd put in the numbers, and you had a certain amount of minutes on it, and you could go on and maybe Skype if the network was good. And so, and then you fast forward a couple years, and now you have Skype on an internet, like on Wi-Fi. And so now I'm in a point where you're on a radio and you get a what's called a scramble call, and the you have between 8 and 10 minutes to get off the ground once you get that mission. So typically I'd be at that time Skyping my family, and then a scramble call would come, and like I got to go, and then go out and do the mission, whatever it was. It could be anywhere from like a scorpion sting or like a fall off of a HESCO barrier to a mass casualty with 9 patients and everyone's missing limbs and a massive firefight. That's the range at which it would go, and we run between 6 to 10 missions a day, every day for 120 days, and so it became a lot of ups and downs. And you'd go, I'd be talking to my family, then you just never know. Like you're getting on an aircraft, and maybe my wife and I were fighting at the time, or maybe I was having a really good conversation with my kids, and then I got to go, and that's the thing I'm thinking about on the way there to the mission. I'm trying not to, and then go do the mission, and let's say it's a somebody who stepped on an IED, and now they're missing limbs, and they're probably going to die, and take them to the hospital, and I'm just frustrated, and come back. I don't want to talk to my family. I don't want to. Sorry, you might hear my dogs.
You're good.
I don't want to talk to anybody. I don't want to eat. Like that was the challenging part of the technological age. Anyway, so deployed a few times, and I really started to get that. Like I was seeing the carnage that was taking place with coalition forces and Americans, and didn't really get a lot of opportunities to shoot the bad guys. Right? Like yes, there were times that we got into firefights, but with that particular mission, you're trying to get on and off the battlefield as fast as possible with the people that you're treating. So my job wasn't necessarily to fight as much as it was to treat people. So, but I knew the war was dying down for that particular mission set, and that's a rescue PRTF, a personal recovery task force, doing or ERQS, doing point of injury care, and I knew that they were still fighting me. So there was only one place that was still deploying consistently, that was working at the highest level. I had really no intention of going there, but I was like, well, I still got fighting me. So you have to go through a selection, go through a whole other selection process, apply for it, and it's just it's a tier 1 unit. Think of like the Air Force's version of the Navy's SEAL Team 6 or the Army's Delta Force. So is there.
Steve, can I ask you a question?
Sure.
When you're going through these multiple deployments, right, you're recognizing that I would say the intensity of what you're doing is starting to die down. What are the conversations like with your support system, your wife, your kids, when you're saying, hey, now I'm going to go do this, which seems like it puts you in a little bit more danger. And I'm wondering kind of how did your support system kind of support you through you saying, I've got more fight in me. I want to continue to do this work.
We had a lot of challenges early on in our marriage and whatnot. And I think knowing that we stuck it through and we fought it out, and she knew that that's what I wanted, that like that's the pathway that was going to make me happy, and really ultimately, those organizations, those rescue squadrons are still deploying. The way that I could rationalize it was if I'm going to deploy and go overseas and risk my life, it better be worth something. It better be worth something. It better not be, and unfortunately it's happened in the past where guys are deployed in really a non-combat zone and just flying around doing training, and then they hit power lines and crash. Or maybe they are in a combat zone, but that they maybe they didn't need to be there, and they hit power lines, or maybe there's electrical malfunction and they crash. And, I, I better be away. If I'm going to be away from my family, I better be worth something. So, and then the agreement was to go over there, to go to this unit was, all right, once I scratch this itch, once this time is up, then she gets to choose where we go, and we end up afterwards. So that was the agreement, and we stuck to it. But it wasn't an easy decision by any means. So I'm thankful and grateful that she supported it. And it was stability. There was stability there, at least in the form of the family. We didn't have to move again after that until it was time for us to leave, as far as me getting out. So there was stability for the kids to go to school and have friends and whatnot. So I don't know if that answered your question.
It does, man. I just always want to put myself, at least I can try and empathize to understand the situation which you're going through because it seems incredibly intense. It seems very stressful on multiple fronts. And then being able to have a support system that can support you to feel like you're showing up and making the commitment that you made worth it is really important. But I know that you have to have a really strong foundation of support behind you in order to do those type of things.
Yeah, absolutely. I think my wife knew that that's what was going to keep me happy and keep me engaged, and keep me doing the thing that I wanted to do. And there was a time period where I was like, okay, I got to slow down, and maybe going to become an instructor was going to be the pathway, and that was the path um, until the accident took place. So I got to this new unit. I applied for that unit. Didn't really train at all, but you gotta do a long ruck, and that was miserable. And so the selection process you know was probably one of the hardest physically demanding things I've had to do because I didn't really train at all. I just went and formed, and not even that well, but I happen to be a cool dude, so they picked me up. And so of these folks, let's say 15 of us went to selection, and only 6 of us were picked up. And these are 15 individuals who are very decorated, who have been to combat many times, and it's just selecting the right person because you are embedded within those other organizations that I described before, those tier ones organizations. You're embedded with them either as a JTAC or a medic attached to those groups. So another year of training, and then get to those teams, and then just start deploying. So I deployed about another 7 times to different areas across the globe, and it was pretty demanding because now you're working, you're on a recall, and sometimes you're carrying a pager or a phone or something like that, and then that phone will go off, and you only have a certain amount of time to get to the base and then be off somewhere around the world, and you don't know where you're going, and you can't tell your family. Like, I know there's a lot of secret squirrels out there, but quite literally, we were, for example, I was driving to, um, I was going to take my family to Dave and Buster's, uh, and we were a little bit ways away. My kids were sleeping in the back seats, and then I got the call, and I had to turn back around and drive into base. And your bags are always packed, so my bag was packed in the car. And the kids woke up to me getting out of the car at the front gate, and they're like, "Hey, this isn't Dave and Buster's." I was like, "No, this isn't Dave and Buster's." Like, but I have to go again. Somebody out there is in trouble, and they need our help. And so got in, met a buddy at the gate who then took me to the compound, and then we left after that, and was gone for another 2.5, 3 months. So you just never know when those things pop up. But that's why we went there. That's one of the reasons why I went there, was to be on that recall, to be there to do the national mission, and if I was going to be gone, it better be for something good, like a hostage rescue or killing a really bad guy. So after deploying 7 times, doing that, and had some really really successful deployments, um, I started to really notice that I didn't want to. I guess I didn't know what we have embedded psychologists within the unit, and um, one of them had put out like an email saying like, "Hey, we're doing like a PTSD education clinic and whatnot." And I was like, "Well, okay, what do people like?" I emailed her and said, "Hey, well, what do people come and ask you about? Like, how do you know you got the PTSD? Like, how do you what like what do people come and tell you?" Like, because I just couldn't fathom what was to be talked about and what is to be fixed, how it's fixed. I just knew that something internally was going on because I couldn't remember people that I had known for 10 years. I couldn't remember the names. I couldn't remember how I knew certain people that I had known for a while. I was very irritable. At one point, like I was, the way I guess best describe it is I'm more comfortable in that setting. I was more comfortable in combat getting shot at than I was around my kids at home screaming and fighting at each other. That was, I could control, at least have a little bit of control in the combat sense where I knew, like I was trained for, I knew what was going on. I spent more time doing that. I've been gone most of my kids, at least half the kids' lives. And so when I'm back and they're overwhelmingly screaming and whatnot, I don't know how to control them other than getting loud and aggressive. And so because I was doing that, my wife, like in one particular instance, just got loud and aggressive with my oldest, and came downstairs afterwards and knew that, man, this is not, like, just shame, just a lot of shame of like, I should not have done that. I know that's going to impact him for a while, and that's not who I am. And I just didn't know what to do until finally my wife fortunately came to me and said, like, hey, I, I love you and I don't want you to get upset, but your kids are afraid of you. And so that was really, finally somebody else was telling me something that I already knew, and was, my wife was brave enough to say that to me. So then that's what led to me reaching out to the psychologist and saying, like, hey, how do I fix what I think is wrong? What do, like, maybe I have TBIs, because I had a lot of TBIs, but took some cognitive tests and whatnot, and really realized that, hey, your brain is performing really well, and you have an MRI, your brain isn't really damaged in any particular way, but you are showing signs and symptoms of pretty severe PTSD. And I said, well, how do I fix that? And so that's what entered into the care that they provide within the unit. And within that unit, you got just a robust group of resources: strength conditioning coaches, dietitians, physical therapists, neuropsychologists, psychologists, physicians. They're all really working to make sure that you are operating at the highest level when you deploy and you come back, that you're ready to go. And most of us operator types are hiding or concealing a lot of our issues so we can continue deploying, but at some point it's going to erupt. And with me, it did. And then after seeing her for a while, I started to enjoy doing what I was doing again. Like I started to feel better, recognize the symptoms that were taking place as far as nightmares, inability to sleep, anxiety, depression, like all these things that were plaguing me. I started to address and figure out, um, and then went into, and then the accident happened.
How do we address those feelings of being out of control, right? Like you talked about, when you're in a combat scenario, you feel like you're in control because you're well trained on how to respond to these scenarios that are occurring, right? But then we find ourselves in a different situation with our family, as an example, and it's not as intense, but we have these feelings that are coming up inside of us that are like, we're out of control. I don't know how to deal with this situation. How do you start that internal monologue? I guess there's like a real element of self awareness in here to be able to say, I'm just out of sorts. I'm not in a place where I feel comfortable kind of, having these conversations with my kids. My wife is coming to me now and saying that my kids are scared of me. Naturally, I think there would be a very similar to when we were talking to the recruiter, right, at the Air Force. You don't know what it's about. You haven't been through this before. I feel like my natural inclining in that situation would be for my ego to pop up and be like, you don't understand what I've been through. But it seems like you were able to navigate that in a much more sustainable, healthier way.
Um, yeah, I mean, it would have been very easy for me to say, to do that, to pretty much say, like, hey, I've got these things going on in my brain. This is me being a dad. This is what being a dad is like, and you know, tough. Deal with it. But I knew that's not the things. The reactions that I was having was not who I wanted to be and who I wanted my children to view me as. And so I knew something was afoot. And it's not like those things go away. It's not like after talking um, to the psychologist and whatnot that, like, oh, I don't feel those things anymore. Like, I still feel those things. I still, like, when my kids fight and argue with each other, and they get disrespectful now that they're older. Like, yes, the boiling still happens. It still takes place. But now I recognize that it's taking place, and I can utilize what had happened before, how I was before, and how I am now. And so I simply ask my son, when those things happen, I say, hey, do you remember when I used to get angry and I used to get loud and aggressive? And he'd say, yes. And I say, do you want me to talk to you that way or the way that I'm talking to you now, which is the way you and I are talking. And he said, well, the way you're talking to me now. And I said, okay, then you need to talk the same way I'm talking, and you need to listen to what I'm saying to you, so that the old, like, not saying that it's going to be your fault that the old me, but I need you to understand that I'm doing my best, and I need you to listen to the things that I'm saying to you. I'm still your father. You cannot disrespect us in these different ways, right? So a long way of saying, like, yeah, it's a self recognition of, like, I know what that used to feel like, and now I can internalize that. I can take a deep breath, and then I can talk calmly, and I know it's more impactful. I know it's going to hit them harder, because as soon as, if I start getting loud, as soon as that happens, they shut off. They turn off and they don't listen.
I had the pleasure of interviewing a brain surgeon with a PhD in neuroscience, and I asked him, what is the most important skill set a human being can develop? And he said, without a doubt, emotional regulation. The ability for us to regulate our emotions in every situation is fundamental, because when our emotions start boiling up, like you talked about, it changes the way in which we perceive other people's actions, the way in which they're talking to us, and the message that they're giving us as well. And it sounds like you've done some amazing self-work, man, to be able to regulate those emotions and those feelings that have come up.
Oh, I appreciate that. Yeah, I think it is work, as you said. Like, even now, like, there's some things that that pop up, and I have to ask myself, is this an emotional response or a factual response? Especially when it comes to work, when it comes to, like, the nonprofit and other things. Like, before I send this email, or before I send, like, respond to this text or whatever it is this, am I sending this as an emotional response, or am I sending this as a factual response? And I usually wait a little bit until I do send that, and make sure that it's everything's in fact, and it's not emotion. There's no emotion in
Let's talk a little bit what happens next. So we've mentioned an accident a couple times here. What happened?
it. Yeah. So, as I said, like, there was a point which I just stopped. I didn't enjoy what I was doing. People pay to go skydive. I was getting paid to skydive, and I didn't enjoy it. I was getting paid to scuba dive, didn't enjoy it. Paid to rock climb, like, it just, all these things that I'm being paid to do. Then it's just like, oh, I got to go jump again. Like, this, it just was work, and it was stress, and I didn't want to do that anymore. So after working on myself and with a psychologist, I started to enjoy those things. Before we're going on to our alert cycle, we set up a climbing trip to Boise, Idaho. It was going to be more of a morale building, team building trip, and part of our job is mountain rescue, rock climbing, lead climbing. So we had two combat controllers with us, and a few of us PJs, and so we're going to work on just lead climbing and single pitch routes, and really easy stuff. Um, just going to be a fun trip stateside before we go into our alert cycle. So brought out the team and one guest. Peter was a guest on the team, and as we set up our second climb of the day, or at least, I'm sorry, our second day of climbing, we're finishing our last climb of the day, and one of my guys, him and I were cleaning up, and I was like, man, it's like 3:30 or something like that. It's time for us to. I think we're all climbed out. Let's go pack up and then head down and head back. It's like a 45-minute drive back into town. We'll grab a beer and some dinner. And as we turn the corner, one of the guys is climbing, and I was like, hey, what's the plan? Hey, Peter, what's the plan here? I was hoping we'd be done. And he's like, oh, we're gonna do the same thing we did yesterday. Climb to the top, get everybody to the top, set up a belay, and belay everybody down. And he's like, it'll take like 30 minutes. And I was like, all right, 30 minutes. This should be quick. It looks like a pretty easy route. So one of our guys gets to the top first. The second guy gets belayed up. He moves over and he sets up a rope in the chains. Third guy is a controller. He gets up to the top. Fourth guy is a controller. He gets to the top. And now I'm starting my climb. As I start my climb, the but right before I start my climb, the third dude was trying to get over the edge of the cliff to belay or rappel himself down on the rope. And there was a little bit of a drop there, just made it really uncomfortable to go down. So Peter naturally was like, hey, I'm going to take the rope and I'm going to move the anchor further back. And I was like, hey, are there chains back there? And he said, no, I'm putting pro in the rock. So a cam and a nut. And I was like, man, I don't really I'm not really down with that. I don't want you to do that, to be honest. I want you to keep it in the chains. And so as him and I had some dialogue back and forth, and we're all team leaders. We're all of the same capacity and of as far as um, skill sets. And I was like, all right, man, I'm gonna let him make his decision. We'll talk about why I want to keep it in the chains, um, and smearing like different techniques of getting over the edge. And so set it up, and that guy, that controller, was able to set up his rappel and get down safely. I had started my climb. I got to the top. Second controller starts getting over the edge, and as he starts clearing the edge, there's a shift in the rock, and I was like, "Peter, is everything good?" Alan or one of our other guys asked, "Hey, is everything good?" And Peter looks at the anchor, kind of gives it a couple tugs, and he said, "Yeah, I think the pro was just setting in place a little bit harder, a little bit deeper, so it actually might be harder to get out and get undone." And I was like, "All right, cool, man, continue on." And so I'm teaching one of my guys here just kind of what I like to build for my pro anchors. And as he gets down about halfway down, the guy that's on the rope, the anchor fails. So the pro that was in the rock failed. So one side blew, the cam or the nut blew, and then it shock loaded the other side because the anchor that was built was called a quad anchor. And it shifted over, and you have probably about a 6 to 8 inch shock load, and then it blew that other side. And so now the rope, so the guy that's on the rope falls about 30 feet. And then Peter, he was tied into the anchor. So he was in that closed system, and the weight of the one guy that was on the rope pulled Peter off of the very top. So Peter fell about 60 to 70 feet. So I'll just never forget, the sound of the rope going by, and then what Peter was saying as he was getting over, flying over the edge and flipping over, and then ultimately landing on his back, really right on top of this stone and bouncing over. And I never forget the sound that one of the other PJs is of him calling Peter's name, and all right, I have to now take over as a team leader and guide um, this treatment plan. So the thing that was going through my mind was he probably broke his back. He probably has a couple injuries, but we can treat him and stabilize him. I don't maybe he's got a broken neck, just by the way he landed. So I don't want him to be moved. And so one of the guys that was on the ground, I say, hey, just run over. Don't flip him over because he was laying on his stomach. Don't flip him over. Just I need you to feel for a pulse and listen for breathing. And he said, he's like, yeah, I got a pulse, and I can't tell if he's breathing though. And then as I'm setting up my rappel, he's like, I lost the pulse. And I said, don't move him. I will be down in a minute. Um, I rappelled down. Got down there, and I looked, listened, felt my own, and I didn't feel anything. We rolled him over safely. I could feel that he had some broken bones, saw some broken bones, and looked and listened and felt again, and still had nothing. And said, "Hey, you need to start CPR." Sorry, my dog just knocked over the baby.
You're totally good.
Um, Sorry, and so look, lesson felt, so we started CPR, and as the other PJ got down, we ended up just continuing with the CPR, and I asked him to get the med ruck and prepare to intubate him. Try to intubate, but it was I couldn't guarantee that the tube was in. So ultimately, ended up having to do what's called the surgical cric, with thyroidotomy. So cutting a hole in his neck and putting a tube there in his throat. So I made sure that was in, and then we did a finger thoracotomy. It's kind of like a chest tube without the tube, and you could see the blood just kind of pour out of his chest. And so we didn't have blood to replace, so I knew we had to seal it back up, and then get on the hold on the line with the dispatcher for 911, and really ask, hey, I need you to launch life flight like right now. And so this was a little bit of a lesson learned of I'd always assumed that life flight would just be easy to call and say, hey, this is who we are. This is my qualifications. I'm a licensed paramedic. Come out and help us. And they wouldn't launch. And so that was like, oh, we're doing CPR right now. I need you to launch like that. You don't have launch authority. And I understood it, but I was very frustrated at that time. And I could see the fire department driving back and forth, not knowing where we were. So I sent one of our guys down to go try to get their attention. And one of the guys, he sprinted up this hill. It was probably about 400 meters, and he was there quick. And so we got there with a monitor and continued to work on. And I said, "Hey, man, like, does Life Flight have a hoist?" And he said, "No." And so that was kind of like where hope kind of went away. And I was like, "There's no way we're going to get him down off the side of this mountain and continue to do CPR to get him into an ambulance or even into the helicopter down below." And so once we got him on the monitor, I told the other guys to step away, and because I knew what was going to come up, and it was going to be flatline, it was going to be a systole, and I don't know, I didn't want them to see it. I don't know why. I just wanted it to just be me to have to experience that and to know that the finality of it all. And so when it did come up, I saw it and I said, "Hey, can you unplug it? Check the cables again. We'll check the tube and then try again." And so we did that, and I was thankful that they tried again, and ultimately ended up declaring him dead there on the scene. And so that was a real um, devastating moment. That I lost a lot of teammates in my in combat, or even in other accidents like car accidents and or them taking their own life, but never in a training asset that I was a team leader of and that I was treating them, and thinking about his family. He was married with a 1 year old, and his wife was pregnant at the time. So all of these things came all at the same time, as these different emotions of, like, with the memorial, the funeral. I'm gonna have to fly back home and see his team. I'm gonna have, like, I wanted them all to hate me, and so I made the hardest phone call I've ever had to make, and call my team leader or my boss and say that, hey, one of our teammates just died on the side of the mountain. So that threw me back into my depression, back into, like, I lost everything at that moment, and pulled myself off a team and worked on myself with those same modalities of treatment that I described with my psychologist, and then I ultimately came back onto the team. And when I came back, we ended up deploying within 36 hours of me being back on a short notice phone call deployment. Successful deployment, came back, was going to deploy again a month after getting back. So I got back in March of 2020, and was going to deploy in May. And in April, the accident closed out. The accident investigation closed out, and they said, "Hey, there's nothing that you could have done to change what happened or to change the outcome. However, we are going to hold you accountable and responsible for what happened as the team leader, and you are going to be removed from your position and from the unit." So this unit I had spent so much time trying to get to, and you know, I'd spent many deployments on, and um, so much time away from my family. I was now just being kicked out of this unit that I tried so hard to get to. So that threw me back into a depression. And now I had a piece of paper to show my psychologist, like, "See, told you it's my fault. It says it right here." And so that was a really challenging time that actually probably threw me in a worse depression than I've ever been in, because I lost my confidence to do anything. I didn't want to go anywhere. They were going to send me to another unit. In fact, back to my old unit in Vegas, and I knew that just wasn't going to be good for me and my family. So I ultimately pursued a medical retirement, with a diagnosis of PTSD, and then started the next pathway out, which is just kind of working on myself for about a year of figuring out, hey, what do I do next? And really, that's what ultimately led to the start of the nonprofit.
Man, it breaks my heart to hear that story, and the gravity of the responsibility that you felt for yourself. You know, my heart honestly broke a little bit when you said that you took the piece of paper to your, psychologist and said, "See, this is proof that I told you." That's just an incredibly heavy burden to carry.
Yeah, yeah, and I know she had been battling just, um, in my mind, and it'll never change that I will always blame myself. There will always be significant blame. Like, I will always bear the burden of guilt, no matter what, who tells me, no matter how many times somebody tells me. I just will always have that. Um, and so now, like, you with all of her consistent battling of trying to help me see that it's not my fault, I was battling every step of the way. And now, like, I think I was just looking for her way to say, like, "Hey, fine, it is your fault. Now what?" And so, like, yeah, but she never did, and I don't, and she never would.
Right.
So yeah.
So we have this incident. We pursue medical discharge, and now we take on the challenge of starting a nonprofit. So why are we going down the path of starting the nonprofit, and what are we trying to solve through Shields and Stripes?
Yeah, so started to figure out what am I going to do for Second Life. Went through several different transition, a couple of transition programs and internships, and I knew that I wanted to um, do something in the health and wellness space. I knew like I had an experience with a company called Exos that I went there for a shoulder injury, and just that was just one of the best times that I'd had in working in a performance environment that was very focused on like just making an individual feel good physically. And I knew the tools that we had at the unit were like that's what it's supposed to be, and not everybody can use it or does use it the way it should be, and maybe it's not executed the way that it should be because everybody has different ideas.
And when you say tools, what do you mean?
Talking like strength conditioning coaches, your physical therapist, just your dietitian. So like really taking the time out of your day to go leverage those tools or leverage those resources to say, all right, like I am doing everything I can rather than like some folks going to a CrossFit gym and that's great. That's fine. That's your thing. Um, I'll take the opportunity to use the red light bed or the sauna or the cold plunge. I take the time to do those things, and a lot of guys don't, and then they don't realize what they had until they don't have it anymore. So I used those for a year as I was processing, and as I took an internship with Exos, I had a vision in 2025. I'm going to start this business, which was going to be focus. It's going to be a performance facility. It's going to have a focus on veterans and first responders because my dad spent so long being a police officer, so near and dear to my heart. And they don't get any of those things that I had. So as I thought there was going to be a job at Exos after my internship, and I was like, "Hey, so what's the next steps here?" And he's like, "There's not a job for you." and I was like, "What am I going to do?" And he said, "Well, do the thing that you said you were going to start doing. We'll just start your business." And I said, "Well, I don't know how to even start that." And so he walked me down the pathway of like, "Okay, we got to go." I went through LegalZoom and what he did and what I should do. So the other thing was like, if I start this business, is it a nonprofit or is it for profit? And so we walked in some exercises of what it's going to cost and what somebody would be willing to pay. And I said, man, all of that sounds more like a nonprofit than a for profit. So ended up looking to see if there's any nonprofits or businesses doing the thing that I want to do. So I don't reinvent the wheel. Maybe I just join their program. And nothing really came out to be doing what I envisioned. And so the closest was an organization or a company called 5x5 Performance Therapy, which run by Dr. Jennifer Byrne. And didn't know her at the time, reached out to her on LinkedIn, and we ended up talking. And I was like, hey, here's what I want to do. Like, you're in the same space. Can we collaborate a little bit? And it turns out her husband was a combat rescue officer who is the officer version of my old job of being a PJ, and we were actually stationed together in Vegas. And I was like, oh man, I didn't know that. Like, hopefully he doesn't think I was an a hole. I was a different Steve at the time, and and so fortunately, like we ended up talking, and as she was giving me kind of feedback and like coaching and mentorship, I was like, I don't need that. I need just kind of somebody to join this problem, just this mission with me. Are you in or are you out? And so she was like, I'm in. So we developed a business plan, figured out who we want to service, how we want to do it, had the relationship with Exos still, and said, hey, Exos, if I bring in veterans and first responders into your facility, and we hired mental health clinicians to do kind of an intensive clinic inside of there, would you be willing to help facilitate? And they agreed to it. And we ran two pilot programs, one being a week long and the other one being 2 weeks long, at least the in-person portion. And and then those were successful, and we ended up settling on a 3 week in-person experience and then a 9 week telehealth off ramp. So the individuals would apply online on our website. They would get screened by our mental health clinicians, really looking for any kind of dependencies or drug abuse, alcohol abuse, anything like that. things that that we typically don't work with, that we wouldn't be a good fit for them, and then as well as acute suicidal ideation, those types of things that it's going to take time to get into our program. So there are other organizations that do manage those particular things, and we'll direct them that way. But for us, it's a very particular group of people who are ready, who are somewhat stable, but looking for growth and treatment, looking to as I was. I was in a place I was still stable. I wasn't threatening to take my life, but I was looking for how do I get better. So the individuals would go to Exos. Right now is what our partnership is with in Phoenix, Arizona, or Gulf Breeze, Florida, where they would receive the strength conditioning program. They would meet with a dietitian for a consult. They would get fed on site with food meals made specific for them, physical therapists, and then in between that time frame, those 3 weeks, so that massage, yoga, do cold plunge, sauna, all those different things. And then in the afternoon, after lunch, they would do their individual and group therapies with the mental health clinician and occupational therapists for psychoeducation and things like that. So do that every day, except for the weekends, for 3 weeks, really reset their minds and their bodies, and then send them back home. And instead of sending them back home to their problems, we off ramp them with a telehealth model where they still have a strength conditioning coach and a PT and a dietitian and a mental health clinician. And now we peer into their cabinets or their pantries to say, hey, what are you eating now, like at home, and how do we replicate what we were doing at Exos? Likewise, here's some tools that were given to you from Therabody and Big Fish Foundation that can, if you don't have a gym, there's some bands and some sliders and things that you can continue to work on your physical therapy. And then with a mental health provider saying, okay, now you're back home, and we can incorporate the family. You can do group sessions with the family and make sure that they understand who this new person is back home, and really off ramp them to be pretty much on their own and going out and conquering the world. And so we've run, I believe, 7 programs so far, and they're very successful. Each one of them have been very unique and dynamic in their own ways, but they've all been met with rave reviews and life changing experiences. And I say life changing also because even in this last one that we just hosted a couple months ago, more than half of them got tattoos on their bodies of this logo right here. And so it's a pretty incredible thing that, a logo that my wife and I created in my truck as we're just driving down the road. I'm like, hey, what do you think about this? Is now permanently on somebody else's body. So that's something that I never imagined. So, but yeah, we service veterans and first responders and active duty members, and it costs about $20,000, give or take, on the economy for travel, which gets them all the services provided, airfare, the lodging for 3 weeks in a resort hotel, and then all the clinical services that are provided.
What an amazing solution, man, to such a complex problem. I want to talk a little bit about, the perception of helping people deal with challenges like we're talking about today often says like, just go talk to a therapist, a psychologist. It's all about the mental, but we're talking about so many other elements of the whole person health here. And I feel like it's really important to emphasize why nutrition, exercise, sauna, cold plunge are a part of this, I would say, protocol rather than just talk therapy.
Yeah, great. I'm not a scientist or a doctor or anything, but there is something to be said. If you look at just depression in general, a lot of folks just wear it on their body, whether it's a destructive behavior or habit, and everybody's got their own vice or their own destructive behavior, whether it's alcohol, maybe it's overeating, lack of physical fitness, poor sleep, making poor decisions, whether it's infidelity and things like that, just to like feel alive, and all those things are affect you physiologically. So if we can attack all of those at the very same time, what tremendous strides and growth that we can make if we are working on physical fitness, if we're working on our diets, and we're working at the same time on our mental health. And especially if we do their physical fitness stuff in the mornings and they tire themselves out and they get exhausted, now they're significantly more vulnerable in the afternoons to because they put it all out there and their endorphins are flowing, they're feeling good. And then they get in the afternoon after eating and hitting the sun and the cold plunge, and it's like I'm ready to talk. I'm ready to get it out and talk through my experiences. And there's a lot of other treatment modalities out there, like your psychedelics and things like that. But I think a lot of those are push button um,
Mm.
medications and things like that. Like, yeah, I've heard great experiences, but then you go back to your problems, and let's say another trauma takes place, and you don't have any tools other than like, okay, I guess I better go back out and take some more drugs or some more herbal medicines to make it go away again. Like, we're leaving here with a whole new foundation that encompasses the whole body and the mind and the spirit. For those that are spiritually inclined, we do have a kind of a religious or faith based speaker that comes and offers that as an opportunity for um, treatment and peace. So hopefully that answered your question.
It did, man. I mean, we're talking about like a whole person reset here through, physical exertion, through cold reset of cold plunge, sauna, nutrition. Everything else is kind of integrated into this protocol, which I feel like is so powerful because often, just in the society that we live in, it's so easy to prescribe a medication or a one time thing to help us very transparently get away from the feeling that we're feeling right now. But the true change comes when we have the opportunity to face these challenges, these emotions, these feelings head on, tackle them, and then move forward on a new foundation, which I feel like is so powerful. How can we help with the mission of what you guys are doing here? For everybody who's tuning in, listening to your story is inspired, just like I am, how can we contribute to spread the word or contribute to the cause and the mission of what you guys are doing?
Yeah, appreciate that. Yeah, I'll add one more thing as well. Is a lot of these, like you said, they're prescribed something, and you see a lot of, if you just look at the business of big pharma and doctors and things like that, you want to think they're all doing goodwill, but there's money involved, and if they prescribe medications, the doctor's getting a cut. They're getting a cut of that pharmaceutical of depending on what they're prescribing. So a lot of these folks that come through our program are oftentimes told they can't do something, and they believe it, and they're told it so often, so much, and they're prescribed medications so often that they're told they can't do it. They believe it, and then they show up to our program, and you have a really excellent strength conditioning coach, Giovanni, and the others that are out there as well, and the physical therapist, and they're like, "Hey, you can do this. You can pick up this weight. You can physically do these things. It's going to be hard. It's going to be challenging, but we're going to break that mental barrier of being told you can't to you can, and it might be uncomfortable when you see the successes. You're going to just continue to expound upon those, and several of them, after the first week of doing the program, come off of those pain meds that they've been on for a decade because they're just like, oh, I didn't know that I didn't need it, and that maybe just like physical work and building a good strong pillar is going to prevent the pains that I've been having. So granted, there are some instances in some cases where pain meds are necessary or certain medications are necessary, but I would say a lot of them are pretty just like built into the because they've just been told so much what to believe. But to answer your question, how can they help? You can go on our website, www.shieldsandstripes.org. A lot of different opportunities to get involved, whether it's volunteering for an upcoming event, whether it's just sharing what we do and how we do it. You can find us on social media pages, and then donating to our program or donating to our cause. I don't get paid out of this. My co-founder doesn't. So all the money is really going to the program and making sure that we continue to help the people that need the help. We have a pretty high demand. There's about 150 people that have applied and are waiting for services, for our services. And ultimately, the goal is to get to a place where we have our own facility, our own building, and we can really get, instead of 8 people at a time, we can get 200 people a year going through these programs, really make a significant impact, and not just in one building, but a building in every single state across the nation. That's what we want. That's the big vision. The 50 years from now, that's the goal, is to be that big. So we can't do it without your help, without your support in getting there, even if it's $5, $10, 100. All of it goes to really helping our cause to help more people. And what I guess I'll finish with what makes us different. Why us over others is there's a lot of great programs out there, and I call them feel good programs. There's a lot of hunting and vacation and retreats and things like that. That's great. You need that. You got to go do those things. Those are very helpful for your mental well-being. However, it's not treatment. It is not a treatment plan. It is not a treatment program. because you're going to eventually go back to all your problems, and those problems are still going to be there. Um, Ours is a treatment program, and that's what I like to outline as very different. Is it's a treatment. You're receiving treatment. You're receiving care, both physically and mentally, and you leave there with tools to become a better steward of your community, become a better parent, become a better son, sibling, uncle, whomever it is that's in your circle. You will ultimately see a change, and your circle will see a change. So that's a mouthful, but try and get it all out there.
Man, I really appreciate everything that you're doing, Steve. From the lived experience, from the challenges that you've overcome, but your confidence in creating solutions for the future, not just a band-aid fix, is something that is truly inspiring, man. I can't thank you enough for coming on the show. I really appreciate it.
Well, I appreciate you having me. It's been a pleasure.
All right, guys, down in the comments, you're going to see all of the information about Shields and Stripe, how you can donate, how we can give more information, and how we can support this amazing mission. All right, that's been a wrap. Catch you guys in the next one.